Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things and... Wait, can I actually use that? Hello once again, beautiful people, and welcome back to Let's Talk. Today we're going to be talking about sex, sexuality, and consent. Let's start with sexuality. Now, a lot of people feel that sexuality exists on a spectrum, from gay on one end to straight on the other end. And while I do agree with the general concept of that, I think a linear spectrum is perhaps a bit too simplistic. I read about an idea recently wherein the author described sexuality as more a point on a circle, like this. So each person would fall somewhere within this circle, with completely heterosexual being in one corner, bisexual being in another corner, gay being in a third corner, and lastly asexual being in the last quadrant there. And I think that this really describes human sexuality a lot better, because it describes four general types as well as a degree to which that applies to you. Now, this doesn't quite address every sexual preference, of course, because it doesn't really address the idea of pansexuality. Pansexuality is the idea that you're attracted to all genders, not strictly just male or female, but also perhaps gender fluid individuals, intersex individuals, and so on and so forth. This is perhaps one of the more encompassing ideas that I've seen, but again, it doesn't really address the idea of pansexuality. Perhaps if you were somewhere in the center. Now, with all these varying sexualities, it's kind of hard to pin down exactly what sex is. If you go by the definition that you probably received in middle school health class, it's when a man and a woman copulate in missionary position, which is, of course, an extraordinarily limiting view of sex. I've always defined sex as the participation in, by two or more partners, a sex act. This, of course, necessitates the definition of what a sex act actually is. Many of you are likely familiar with the idea of erogenous zones. These are locations on the body that, when stimulated, can result in sexual arousal. The genitals being the foremost among them. Also, the anal or perianal region, the belly button, earlobes, back of the neck. There are lots of them, and it's not even a general idea. Certain people might receive sexual arousal from stimulation of parts that other people do not, which complicates the definition even further. If some people have places that they can be aroused where other people cannot, how could you possibly define a sex act? Well, you can't just say that the stimulation of an erogenous zone equals sex. Obviously, if you are manually stimulating someone's genitals, that's a lot closer to a sex act than rubbing someone's ears. So it might be tempting to define sex as the stimulation of an erogenous zone until orgasm. But again, I do think this is somewhat limiting. Imagine two people having sex for the first time who are still nervous and getting to know each other's bodies. They might not be able to achieve orgasm. They might just not be comfortable enough with each other to get to that point. So could you simply say that they never had sex? Well, no, that's a little disingenuous. So where does that leave us exactly? We can't say that simply the stimulation of an erogenous zone is sex. We can't say that the stimulation of an erogenous zone until orgasm is sex either. So you have to kind of define it somewhere in between. Personally, I think the most accurate definition is the stimulation of the genital, anal, or perianal region, either manually, assisted, or perhaps orally. It doesn't necessarily have to go to orgasm either. And so I think that's probably the most general possible definition that you could use to encompass all sexualities in terms of what exactly defines sex. Which, of course, brings us to the last topic of consent, or when you should have sex with someone. Some situations are fairly obvious. If you're dating someone and the two of you have discussed it and you're perfectly ready to have sex, then you should go ahead and pursue that. If, however, you stumble upon a passed out person at a party somewhere and you decide, hey, I'd like to hump them, that's not okay. That is constituting a situation wherein you're having sex with somebody without getting their consent. If they're passed out, some terrible people out there might say, well, she can't say no, or he can't say no, or they can't say no, but also they can't say yes, which I think is the best definition of consent. Is unless the person that you want to have sex with is physically capable of saying yes or communicating their willingness to you, then you don't have consent. If you come across somebody who is passed out drunk or in a coma or, I hesitate to even say this, but dead, then obviously you can't get their consent. A perfectly capable partner who is willing to discuss things, either, verbally or via the means of sign language, perhaps, or, through some other means, who can communicate to you, yes, this is something that I want, and you feel the same way, then you can get consent. And that is extremely important in my opinion. And I don't think I'm alone in that stance. Sexual assault is a huge topic. And if there's anything that we can do to help minimize that, or help minimize the risk of that, then that's something that we should be doing. I've heard a statistic recently that something like 1 in 5 women on college campuses will experience sexual assault. That is horrifying. That is deplorable. I mean, I simply can't wrap my head around how someone could do that to another person. But that's why the idea of consent is so important, because there are people out there who can fathom ways to do that, and who will, and who have gone out and done these terrible, terrible things to other people. But that's just a sad reality of the world that we live in, unfortunately. If you have any comments about what we discussed today, please feel free to leave a comment below, write on Facebook, or tweet me on Twitter. If you liked the video, please feel free to press the like button. If you'd like to see more content from this channel, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe. And you can join me on Friday when our conversation will continue on sex, sexuality, and consent. Or you can join us next Monday for our next conversation. Thank you for your time and have a great day. If you go by the definition, my body physically rejects that definition.